My name is Alan Palais, and this is the Sunday morning service of the Unitarian Universalist Fellowship of Pottstown. I am a member of the congregation and will be leading the service today. We are a congregation that welcomes all, whether you're seeing us with spirits high or spirits low, we welcome you. Whether your beliefs tend toward atheism or theism, liberalism or conservatism, we welcome you. So whoever you are, wherever you are, whomever you love, we are glad you are with us today. Unitarian Universalism is built on 7 ethical principles. They are written next to the order of service. In addition to these principles, our union culture promotes the notion that wisdom can be found from many sources, with a special place held by reason and science, but can also be found in the arts, humanities, and in spiritual intuition. We believe we have much to learn from the great thinkers of the past, but in building the future, we are not permanently tied to any past ideology or theology. With these values in mind, we consider a wide array of topics in our various Sunday morning services, and we have a wide array of speakers, including our ministers, guest ministers, members of our congregation, and lay speakers from outside our fellowship. Today is the day of the federal holiday called Juneteenth. I'd like to now say a few things in recognition of this holiday. Juneteenth commemorates the emancipation of enslaved African Americans. The date June 19th was chosen for that holiday because on that date in 1865, the Union Army freed the African Americans who were enslaved in Texas. Why was that event chosen to mark emancipation? Abraham Lincoln's Emancipation Proclamation issued during the Civil War made slavery illegal in Texas and in all the other states of the Confederacy. But enforcement required the defeat of the Confederacy and the advance of the Union troops. Texas was the last Confederate state that the Union troops entered at the end of the war. Although Juneteenth celebrates the end of slavery, as we all know, conditions that mirrored slavery, whether it was Jim Crow or the suppression of civil rights or the continuing struggle to fight racism, continued long after the end of slavery. So the Juneteenth holiday reminds us where we've come from, but it also inspires us to think about where we want to go. I continue with the words adapted from a statement by Reverend Karen Johnson. Juneteenth reminds us that there is the possibility of joy, even in the midst of pain and injustice. And as we make our way into a common future, there is no doubt we swim in a collective past. What a gift a holiday Juneteenth is. We have gratitude for the generations of African American elders, largely women, who insisted on this nation seeing how important this holiday was for all Americans. While Juneteenth comes out of the African American history and tradition, it is meaningful to all, regardless of our racial identities. Now we move to announcements. Are there any announcements?
Hi, I'm Kay. I just want to make an announcement that we are having a coffee hour outside today. So just get your coffee and take it out, and the snacks will be outside. Thank you.
Any other announcements? Our pulpit guest this morning is Reverend Rev Schwalenberg. Now, I use the term pulpit guest instead of the term speaker. I usually introduce a speaker because Reverend Craig will be involved in many parts of the service, including the sermon. Reverend Craig is a Unitarian Universalist minister who served as a parish minister with several congregations in Wisconsin and New York. He also served as an interim minister with congregations in Connecticut and Pennsylvania, and is a member of the Unitarian Universalist Trauma Response Ministry team. He has started a new chapter in his career as a community minister, exploring where play and spirituality cross paths. Reverend Craig has now a few additional words to say by way of introduction. Reverend Craig.
Hello. Thank you all for your invitation to be a guest in your pulpit today. It's an honor and a privilege to be with you, even if only online. It is my tradition, taught to me by a good colleague, the Reverend Bob Janis, that when visiting a pulpit, you take a few moments to share something positive about the minister or ministers that usually serve and preach from it. In this case, I don't know your regular ministers very well, though I did have a few very nice conversations with Reverend Dave when I was serving a congregation in the chapter. He was warm and welcoming and quite pleasant to chat with. I see that they are retiring again, and that you'll be celebrating their departure and the end of their ministry with you at the end of the month. And I wish you all a laughter-filled and probably tear-filled celebration and whatever comes next in your path. I would like, however, to take a moment to speak about your building. I'm not there on site with you today, but I have actually visited your sanctuary grounds. Last year, while driving through Pennsylvania to meet with a colleague, I saw one of your signs on the road, and I decided to follow it to see what I would find. I had no problem finding your building, something which is not always true, so kudos to you. The building was locked up due to the pandemic, but there was a helpful notice on the door letting me know how to reach you. I took a few minutes to stretch my legs and wander around the grounds. Love the garden in the back and the play area. If I remember right, there's a peace pole. And most impressive was that piece of art by your front door. Even with none of you there, your sanctuary and the grounds around it radiated a feeling of open-hearted hospitality and ecological stewardship, and nurturing of the human spirit and the creative spark. I remember thinking to myself as I headed back to my car, I will have to return here once they are open. It'd be a good congregation to preach to. And here I am, but I didn't make it in person yet. Perhaps next time I'll be with you there in person, and I can experience you and your sanctuary in person from the inside this time, which you all love and care for so well. One can hope. Thank you.
Thank you, Reverend Craig. We hope to have you back next time physically. The time has come to light the chalice. Reverend Craig will offer a few words.
As Alan lights the chalice in your sanctuary, I invite anyone joining us from home to light their own. The flaming chalice is the symbol of our larger Unitarian Universalist community, our shared historical tradition, and our free, affirming faith. May this flame and all of the flames we light, along with our presence here together, mark this time, this place as sacred.
We will now have our first hymn, number 112, Do You Hear? And we're not yet ready to sing because of the pandemic, but things are getting better with the pandemic. And hopefully soon we will be singing. So Carly will just play the music for Do You Hear? Now we will have a story for all ages. Ruby?
Good morning, I'm Miss Ruby, and we have a special story for all ages today for Father's Day, and a few extra guests that we brought to enjoy the story. A few of our daddy stuffies, their babies. So I don't know about all of you, but in our house, bedtime and story with Daddy was always a favorite. So we are recreating that right now. And we are waiting to see if it comes up, this book, which my kids gave their dad on Father's Day several years ago. What, Maddie? 3 years ago? Maybe. Daddy, I love you, and I want you to know I have a great time wherever we go. Yeah. Oh. I was just looking to see if get the pictures. I might have.
Hang on. Zoom, when I shared the screen, it very helpfully closed the Zoom window. So
Oh.
I believe on Zoom, they are seeing, are you seeing the book on Zoom?
Yes, we are seeing the book.
Oh, we're not seeing it here. Sam and Maddie, why don't you guys introduce some of your daddies and your babies while we let Rick work that out. Why don't you guys each choose your favorite? Okay, we have Monkey George and baby orangutan. There we go. There we go. Maddie, who's your
Oh, you
favorite?
know what I can do? I got it. Hang on one second. Give me 1 second.
Okay. Between your pig
I
and
know.
Oh.
Here.
Pepe Pig and Aurora. There we go. There we go. Now we see the book too.
Hang on, Zoom doesn't see it yet. Just relax.
All I can say is thank goodness we have Rick, because if it were me, there'd be no chance that you guys could see the book today.
No. There we go.
We are perfecting our technique here. Learning new tricks every day.
There we
Right?
go. Okay, now it should be.
And is it on Zoom too?
It is on Zoom and it's visible here. Okay, I think we're good.
Thank you, Rick, for working your magic.
What page are we?
We can go back to the First one, the carnival one.
Okay.
Okay, now that everyone
Here
can
we
see it. Okay. I'm sweating up here. Okay, here we go. Daddy, I love you, and I want you to know I have a great time wherever we go. At the car wash, we pretend we're deep in the sea, and the brushes are fish waving their fins at me. Camping is my favorite summer event. We sleep in the woods. I help pitch the tent. We plant seeds out back in neat straight rows and then water them with a garden hose. Going to the petting zoo is always lots of fun. We feed goats, pigs, and sheep out in the bright, warm sun. When snow covers the ground and the hills are all white, we sled and make snowballs from morning to night. In that picture back there, the dad had a beard to keep warm. Oh. At the neighborhood park, we jump, swing, and play. Soon the sun sets. Have we been here all day? I love you, Daddy, for all that we do. In a contest for best dad, the winner is you. Happy Father's Day, everyone.
Thank you, Ruby.
Go now in peace.
Our fellowship has existed for over 50 years because each year our members and friends have contributed a great deal of physical and mental labor and pledged financial support. This year has been no different. Much work, much physical labor, much mental labor. So you probably thought you could relax now. No, the baskets are on their way. Thank you, everybody. Whatever you give today was, I'm sure, is greatly appreciated by all of us. I now invite Reverend Craig to present 2 readings that he has picked out.
The first reading today is an adapted excerpt from The Color Purple by Alice Walker. Here's the thing, says Shug. The thing I believe. God is inside you and inside everybody else. You come into the world with God, but only them that search for it inside find it. And sometimes it just manifests itself even if you're not looking or don't know what you're looking for. Trouble do it for most folks, I think. Sorrow, Lord, feeling bad. It, I asked? Yeah, it. God ain't a he or a she, but a it. But what do it look like, I asked. Don't look like nothing, she say. It ain't a picture show. It ain't something you can look at apart from anything else, including yourself. I believe God is everything, say Shug. Everything that is or ever was or ever will be. And when you can feel that and be happy to feel that, you found it. Shug, a beautiful something, let me tell you. She frowned a little, looked out across the yard, leaned back in her chair, looked like a big rose. She say, my first step from the old white man was trees, then air, then birds, then other people. But one day when I was sitting quiet and feeling like everything, not separate at all, I knew that if I cut a tree, my arm would bleed. And I laughed and cried and I run all around the house. I knew just what it was. In fact, when it happened, you can't miss it. The second reading is a poem by Denise Levertov entitled The Thread. Something is very gently, invisibly, silently pulling at me. A thread or a net of threads, finer than cobweb and as elastic. I haven't tried the strength of it. No barbed hook pierced and tore me. Was it not long ago this thread began to draw me, or way back? Was I born with its knot about my neck, a bridle? Not fear, but stirring of wonder makes me catch my breath when I feel the tug of it, when I thought it had loosened itself and gone.
Thank you, Reverend Craig. The next, we now go into the hymn number 94, What Is This Life? Now this hymn, the words to this hymn are come from a poem called Leisure by W.H. Davies, and it is one of my favorite poems. So I'm going to read the words before you play. What is this life if full of care? We have no time to stand and stare. No time to stand beneath the boughs and stare as long as sheep and cows. No time to see when woods we pass, where squirrels hide their nuts in grass. No time to see in broad daylight streams full of stars, like stars at night. No time to turn at beauty's glance and watch her feet, how they dance. A poor life this, if full of care. We have no time to stand and stare. Thank you, Carly. I now invite Reverend Craig to present the sermon.
One day, when I was 12 years old, my family went on a small day trip. We were living in Wisconsin then, and there was no shortage of interesting tourist destinations to choose from in the surrounding areas. And that particular day, we were headed to the House on the Rock. Any of you heard of the House on the Rock in Wisconsin? I can't hear you or see you, but if I... Aha, good. I knew there'd be somebody. The House on the Rock is just that. It is a large, sprawling house built on the top of the rock bluffs near Spring Green, Wisconsin. It's where Frank Lloyd Wright had his home. The house is a very impressive tourist trap, not only because of its style and its location, but because of what it contains. The House on the Rock is a mad collection of collections. It's an insane museum of sorts. Once you pay your admission, you are allowed to wander from room to room, checking out the various collections of odd things. As a 12-year-old, I thought it was fabulous. There was one room, it was filled with musical instruments that played themselves. Instruments of every shape and size, all of them connected to air hoses and wires, playing some sound that was maybe musical. There was one room that had case upon case, all filled with miniature dioramas, miniature scenes assembled down to the littlest detail, including miniature people frozen in midlife. There's one room, they call it the Infinity Room, that is made entirely of glass. Walls, ceiling, floors, all glass. And it is suspended 200 feet over the valley of trees and rocks. I do not recommend it for those of you scared of heights or suffering from vertigo. Every room was some new adventure, some new wonder waiting to be explored, and I could have spent all day in some of those rooms. I could have, except one thing, my father. Dad kept us moving from room to room to room, keeping us on some schedule I was unaware of. Every room was the same for him. We would enter the room together. We would all look around in wonder, laughing at some things and oohing over that and ahhing over that. And then we would spread out, moving from one new thing to another. My sister looking in this direction, I would look over there, and then we'd call back and forth about what we had discovered. And then on some signal I never heard, my dad would be at the room's exit calling to us. Time to go. Come on. Craig, that's enough. Let's check out that next room. Come on, we haven't got all day. And reluctantly, slowly, my sister and I would move to the next room. And then we reached the final room. It was also the grandest room. It's better even than the Infinity Room. The final room is the carousel room. Now, if you're in the pews, look at the people who said they've been to the House on the Rock. They're nodding their head right now. The room is huge with a narrow walkway with railings along two walls of the room. And in the middle of the room, on the other side of the railings, is a carousel. A carousel like no other in the world because it is made up of pieces of other carousels from around the world and across the ages. There are wooden horses, so real you can almost hear their breath, the sound of their hooves. There's fantastical creatures riding up and down on poles, dragons, mermaids, llamas, camels, elephants, chimeras, winged horses, and more unicorns than you can imagine, all galloping around and around as the grand carousel spins. There are lights on every pole along the top and the bottom, and all the lights are gleaming off of brass and gold fixtures, flashing in mirrors small and large. And of course, traditional carousel music is playing in the background. I remember leaning on the rail and watching the various animals spin around, delighted in picking out the different forms. I have seen larger carousels, but I have never seen one so grand and so amazing. I watched the carousel until I was dizzy from the revolutions. And then I left the rail and I headed for the exit. Once there, I found my sister and my mother waiting for me. My father was not. I grew worried. Maybe I had spent too long in the room and had upset Dad's schedule. He might have grown impatient and gone outside, waiting in the car. That would be bad. Afraid I was in trouble, I asked where Dad was, and my mother nodded back to the room and the railing. I looked back at the carousel, and there was my father, his hands on the railing near where we first entered the room, oblivious to the crowd around him, staring at the carousel with an intensity I did not recognize. I moved back into the room towards him slowly, not sure what was going on. The tables were turned, and the situation just begged for a smart aleck comment from me. I thought I would walk up close to my dad and go, "Time to go! Don't have all day!" When I was close enough for him to hear me over the music, I looked up at his face, and the words stuck in my throat. My father had tears in his eyes, slowly draining down his cheek. He was staring at the spinning horses, and he was crying and smiling at the same time. And it wasn't the smile I was used to, the one when we were all telling jokes or playing games. It was smaller than that smile. It was light and childlike. The innocent smile of awe and wonder children wear with ease. I continued walking, and I stood beside him, and I looked at the carousel next to my father, and I watched him kind of out of the corner of my eye. Finally, he looked down at me, and he put his hand on my shoulder, and he said, "It's almost magical, isn't it?" "Yeah," I said. He looked back at the carousel, and we stood there for a few more minutes. And then I felt him shift beside me. He wiped his hand across his face, and he looked down at me, and I watched the smile change before my eyes. And we turned our back on the carousel, and we walked to the exit, walking out into the bright sun. I saw something magical that day, and something I didn't understand. My dad had left his schedules and his rules and his responsibilities on the floor of the carousel room. For a moment, they were unimportant and non-existent. He was happy and sad at the same time, full of awe and wonder that I had never seen before. Some years later, my father would make some drastic changes in his life, difficult changes for him and for our family. And as an explanation for these changes, he said, "I realized I wasn't happy, and I had to figure out how to be happy again." I always remembered that day at the carousel room, and I never fully understood what I'd seen. I wouldn't until I experienced the same awe and wonder, and that same timeless moment of bliss. Shortly after Cheryl and I started dating, many, many years ago, she invited me to go on vacation with her in celebration of her birthday. We'd only been going out for 3 months, and I could not afford to go with her on vacation. I was in debt, I had to work, I had no money. I was working as a cab driver and living off of tips. And so I refused to go on vacation with her. She didn't accept any of those reasons. She made way more than I did, and she was willing to pay my share of the costs. And I argued with her. I came up with other reasons and other arguments and rationalizations, and she was having none of it. It was our first big argument, and she correctly identified my objections for what they were: pride. I couldn't accept that she was able to pay for me to go on vacation. If I couldn't afford it on my own, I wasn't going to go. It was stupid, and Cheryl told me so. Now, that is rarely a good means of ending an argument, by the way, telling your partner they're being stupid. Even if they are, I don't recommend it. I walked off in a huff, and my pride was wounded, but it was intact. I hadn't gotten very far before I realized that she was right, and I was being stupid. I turned around, and I apologized, and I accepted her invitation. For vacation, she chose to travel to Door County, Wisconsin. The same people who've probably been to the House on the Rock probably know where Door County is, but for those who have not, Door County is, if this is Wisconsin, Door County is the thumb. It sticks out into the lake. It's got more coastline parks than any other state in the country, any other county. I think it's the most beautiful spot in Wisconsin. Anyway, Cheryl had been to Door County before. I had not. And so on our first day, we drove up the Green Bay coast. That's the western side of the Door. It was beautiful. It was early October, and the leaves were at their most vibrant colors. Maple trees bursting in red, elms shining yellow like the sun. The sky was clear and bright blue with white wisps of clouds stretched across it, and the sun shone through the trees and onto the water of the bay, creating fields of sparkles on the waves. We drove leisurely from town to town, and Cheryl decided that she wanted to mail some postcards. We stopped at the post office in Fish Creek. We pulled into the parking lot and got out of the car. Cheryl invited me to come in with her, and I considered it briefly. The gentlemanly thing to do would probably have been to join in the post office, waiting in line with her. I knew that, but I couldn't bring myself to do it. The sun felt so good on my face, and the air smelled so crisp and clean, so refreshing. I asked her if it would be all right if I waited outside for her. With a smile, she said, "Sure," and she walked inside. Outside of the post office, they had a bench facing the inlet of the bay. I sat down. The traffic continued past me on the road between my seat and the inlet. People walked along the sidewalk in front of me from both directions. It was a busy road and a busy town in a busy time of the year. But my view of the inlet of the bay was unobstructed. And the sun still shone on the water. The leaves were reflected in the water, blurs of color amidst the sun sparkles. And I sat there waiting, though I wasn't waiting. I don't remember how long I sat there. I never looked at my watch. I had nowhere to be. I had no deadlines to meet, no schedule to follow. I sat there on the bench and I did just that. I just sat there. No worries, no concerns, no planning, and time passed unnoticed. Sometime later, Cheryl finished in the post office and found me sitting on the bench. I wasn't aware of her presence at first. I was lost in the feeling. And unnoticed, tears were streaming gently down my face. Cheryl softly asked, concern in her voice, "What's wrong?" And I startled out of the place I had been. And still looking out over the water, I answered, "Nothing. Nothing's wrong." She moved a little closer to me and she asked calmly, without any accusation, "Why are you crying?" I could not bear to look at her. I looked down and said, "I'm happy. I'm at peace. I have no worries, and I can't remember the last time I felt this way." Cheryl sat down beside me on the bench. She took my hand in hers, and she didn't say a thing. She just sat there in silence with me and held my hand. And together, we watched the sun on the water, and we just let time pass us by. After that day, I think I understood my father's experience with the carousel. I remember the feelings that flooded me that day in Fish Creek on the post office bench. I remember being almost indescribably happy and joyful. I remember the whirlwind of my mind slowing down, setting the worries and doubts aside for a while. I remember a feeling of rightness with the world and the rightness of belonging, a sense of something greater than myself of which I was a part of and apart from most of the time. The feelings were overwhelming and the joy and sadness at the same time. I have never forgotten that day, that feeling. I've spent years trying to cultivate it and trying to name it, and we have no words in our language that do it justice. Like my father before me, that experience, brief though it was, affected my life. I knew that day that I would marry Cheryl. I knew that I wanted a different life than the one I was living, a different job and a different attitude. My goals changed that day, and chief among them was to remember that feeling and to feel that way again and to share that feeling with others if I could. A few years later, I would find myself joining a new faith, quitting my job, moving away from my home state, and becoming a Unitarian Universalist minister. That first trip to Door County was almost 3 decades ago. We used to go at least once a year when we lived in Wisconsin and in Illinois. We tried to make a spiritual retreat, a pilgrimage of sorts, to the door. Most of the time, we brought friends, introducing them to the magic, much the same way Cheryl introduced me to it that first time. One of those trips, Cheryl and I traveled to the door on our spiritual retreat, traveling with friends and family, bringing new people to our favorite place, and we were both looking forward to the peace and the tranquility and the feelings of bliss that we had come to expect. It had been a rough summer, and our spirits were in serious need of renewal. We spent 4 days in the best spot we'd ever found. We saw the sunset every day and the sunrise a couple of times. We were surrounded by friends and full trees and the sound of the waves and crisp, clean air. And we waited for the bliss. We waited for that moment of connection we had come to expect, had come to need. And we waited. And we waited. And it never came. We sat there on the waters of Lake Michigan, the sun shining warm and bright on our faces, and we wanted to cry. Where was the magic? Many years ago, I read a science fiction book called Dirk Gently's Holistic Detective Agency. I remember almost nothing about the book except the title, which is pretty catchy, I think, and this quote from Dirk's navigational style while driving. He said, "I point my car in a direction and I just drive. I rarely get where I want to go, and I often arrive where I need to be." That retreat was like that. We did not get where we wanted to go. Eventually, though, we arrived at where we needed to be. After a couple of days, Cheryl and I talked about our sense of loss and our missing that moment of bliss. And as we talked, we realized all of the things we had brought with us on our retreat. All the worries, all the hurts, all the fears, they were with us the whole time. We had never set them down. We never did experience that moment of bliss that year, but we did get renewed and our spirits did get recharged, and we learned a valuable lesson. These moments of bliss are not about a place. They don't require a magnificent carousel or even a beautiful sunset. that sense of connection, that sense of being a part of something larger, grander, deeper, while still being apart from it all, does not come from out there. It comes from in here. It isn't magical. It's a miracle, but it's a miracle like everything else is a miracle. Peter Mayer, the UU folk singer, sings the song, "Everything is holy now." I share that belief. Much like Shug says, the divine is in everything. And sometimes we are lucky enough to feel a part of that divine oneness of the world. And as Shug says, when you feel it, you can't help but know it. I do think she had one thing wrong, though. She says sorrow is the easiest way to experience, and I don't think that is true. Maybe it's my privilege showing, but I think peace is, and calm attention. I think choosing to put our burdens down for a while and allowing ourselves to be happy, stepping out of our own way, that's the easiest way to experience it. That feeling of joy and that feeling of peace, that feeling of oneness with the world, that moment of bliss, it's there. It's always there within us. And we don't have to go looking for it. As a matter of fact, looking for it means you're not experiencing it. We just have to surrender to it. Now, I don't know where you're going to find it, but I'm sure that it is there waiting for you. And my guess is in your coffee hour, social hour outside, some of you have already thought of your own moments of bliss and are ready to share those with other people. And I encourage you to do so. Because it is there. It's waiting for you to take notice of it and to experience it. And it's waiting for you to set down your worries and your fears and your concerns for just a moment. Now, I am not claiming to be enlightened by any stretch of the imagination. I am still struggling with the mundane, annoying details of my life. My office is a mess. The bills keep coming in the mail, and I still have more than my share of worries. And these last 2 years have been an unimaginable ongoing trauma for all of us, and challenging in so many ways, too many ways. But I have come to realize that the struggle does not have to be constant. I try to take the time on a regular basis while rocking around my small town, surrounded by the hills and the mists, and I pause. And I remember a few moments some years ago, and I smile. And I relax. And I look around with eyes that see something beyond the day-to-day. Just a glimpse, just a moment of bliss, really. But how powerful, how transformative, how awesome that moment is, and all of those moments truly are.
Thank you, Reverend Craig. I know I've had moments, I was just talking to Linda the other day about a moment of, I guess you call it, I didn't use that term, but a moment of bliss. And I suspect others have had that kind of thing. Perhaps we'll talk about it during coffee hour. Our closing hymn is number 330, The Arching Sky of Morning Glows. Reverend Craig now has some closing words.
Separate though we may be by distance and space, or the paths we travel through life, we have gathered together today in worship to find meaning, to find solace, to find support and strength, that we might do the work we are called to do, tearing down the structures of injustice and inequality and building up the beloved community. As Alan extinguishes our chalice in the sanctuary, I invite any of you with lit chalices at home to extinguish them now. We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we are together again. Be well and be safe, my beloveds. Take care of yourselves, and let us also take care of one another. Ask for help when you need it. Help others where you can. And find joy. Create beauty. And make holy trouble. Blessed be.
Thank you again, Reverend Craig. Now we're going to turn off the recording, and we're going to go on to joys and concerns. We are caring